there'll be more folks that trickle in, but we've got an hour together, which is great. And I'll just, I'm the MC for the day. The true stars of the show are Rick and Kaitlin. They've got hundreds, if not thousands, of hours experience and knowledge in SmartSuite, so they'll have a lot of knowledge to share and some knowledge bombs to drop, which is going to be fantastic. So just a few kind of setting of the scenes and housekeeping items before we kick this virtual fireside chat off. But again, mostly just want to thank Rick and Kaitlin for spending time today, and all the guests that are here. Thanks for registering. Thanks for showing up. I know everyone's got busy schedules. 1st of October, first day of a new quarter. Fall started. We've got our green sweaters on. A lot of things to be excited about. So again, appreciate your time today. The webinar is going to be recorded. So if you want to take notes, great. If not, you'll receive the full recording. The main thing is we want you to participate, right? And the main two things is show some love to Rick and Kaitlin as we're having the conversation. We'd love to see the reactions. And then, of course, if you have questions along the way, put them in chat, put them in Q&A. We'll weave them into the conversation in real time as we can. And if not, we're going to save some time at the very end of the call to cover all those questions. So few quick introductions. My name is Jeff McAdam. I'm an account manager here at SmartSuite. In my part-time, I help out with the webinar team. And so, my whole role is all about the customers. And I've learned a lot of things in the time I've been here, but the few things that I'll call out, and I've really learned a lot from every single customer, and is every SmartSuite build is different. Like they're unique. And the drivers behind these builds, they're innovative, they're early adopters, they're creative, they're problem solvers. And of course, they love technology, but often they also really understand the people side of it as well. So they can see the current problem, and they also can see the problems in the future. And that describes Kaitlin to me. We've known each other for a couple months only. Rick and Kaitlin have worked together for a while now. But that's why I'm so excited to have Kaitlin on today, because this is kind of her second, maybe even third go around with SmartSuite. And I'll let her tell her story. But it should be a really good conversation today. And thank you again, Kaitlin, for doing that. On the webinar side, the goal with the webinars is to have a holistic perspective, right? From our founders, our executives, our product team, our support team, our solution engineers, our CRO, Rick, and ultimately our customers as well. And so again, this is what today is all about. It's sharing that story of the customer, real world story. Alongside of me, you might have already met them, is Rick Palaia, our CRO, our fearless leader. One of the main reasons I joined SmartSuite. I think he's got one of the best beards in the business as well. Very knowledgeable. Came from Airtable, been at SmartSuite for a handful of years now. And then Kaitlin Pierce, the star of the show. Long title, but I'll give it my best shot. Analyst for Economic and Workforce Development and Continuing Education at AB Tech. So hopefully I got that right.
Mouthful.
And with a bunch of other hats in there as well. That can't fit in the title. So high level, I'm sure you all read the description, one of the reasons why you joined, but just to recap, together we're going to go inside AB Tech's SmartSuite journey, hear directly from Kaitlin, and alongside with Rick, we're going to talk about challenges AB Tech faced before SmartSuite, why SmartSuite was chosen over other solutions, how the implementation rolled out, some early wins, some breakthroughs, collaborations, talk about dashboards and automation. So we're going to cover a lot. This is a virtual fireside chat, kind of the first of its kind as far as here at SmartSuite. So there's no pre-planned deck. This is a kind of open flow conversation. So we're going to try to keep the lanes to some degree, but I'll let Rick and Kaitlin kind of go down the path that they feel that they want to. And again, your Q&A will help kind of drive where the conversation is going. So please participate. Don't hold back on those questions. So I guess before I turn the mic over to Rick and Kaitlin, I figured we'll just do a few rapid fire warm-up questions for you, Kaitlin. Okay. Real easy, real fast. First one's really controversial. Do you do coffee or matcha?
I'm gonna catch some flack here because I do live in Asheville and we're kind of maybe not wrongly stereotyped as being a little bit hippie leaning crunchy community. I do not like matcha.
Okay. Okay.
I do
Even though you're
coffee
in
and I do
green.
chai.
Yeah. Okay. I'm with you there. I'm stuck on coffee, so at least we got 2 votes for that. Rick, we'll let you be the tiebreaker.
Yeah, I mean, 'tis the season for pumpkin spice lattes, isn't it?
Okay.
So I'll
All right.
lean coffee, but I
All
do
right,
love a good
good.
matcha.
I love it. I love it. 2 more, and then I'll flip it over to you both. First concert, live concert.
That I remember. I think it was a group called FFH, which was Far From Home, which was probably back in the early thousands, maybe late 90s.
Okay, I'm gonna have to look that up. How about you, Rick?
Blink 182.
Ooh, solid,
That's a bit
solid,
about me, doesn't it? Yeah.
solid. Okay, last one, a little more relevant, and we'll get into the meat of the conversation. First job that you ever had. First job you ever had.
Well, I mean, besides babysitting, because I was a girl who grew up in the 90s, I worked at a little like fast food joint sort of a thing on the college where I was getting my first bachelor's degree. So yeah, learned how to operate a deep fryer.
Ooh, nice, nice, dangerous. How about you, Rick?
I worked one summer as the right-hand man for my dad, who was a carpenter construction. So basically just removing tile from bathrooms and brutal work. Like I learned that summer, I want to try to use my mind and have an immense respect for people that are handy and use their bodies for work because yep, never again.
Nice. Well, that set the stage for good work ethic. You still have that for sure. Well, cool. I'll leave the kind of next step to you guys. If you want to do a little context on your current job, right? We talked about first jobs. I think you having some context on current job, and then we can kind of go into the questions. But again, thank you to everyone who's here joining the conversation. Thank you to Rick. Thank you to Kaitlin. Let's go on this journey together. And yeah, any questions, please put into Q&A or to chat, and we'll get those answers.
Awesome. Quite the intro, Jeff. I couldn't help but think with Caitlin's title, how fun that would be to fit onto a name tag at like a networking event, just like wrapped around your name in a spiral or some sort.
Oh no, I have an NFC card that links to a Canva based business card because I'm not paying that printing fee.
Of course you do. Yeah, folks in the audience, this is a glimpse of Kaitlin Pierce right here. So let's rewind the clock. Let's have some fun. This is actually, I bet most people on the call here don't know this. This is a round 2 conversation. Kaitlin and I have done a session-ish like this about 18 or so months ago, and I think we're probably now ticking over 2 years of knowing each other in a working capacity. Um, Late night calls, revelations about a new way to solve something in SmartSuite or a feature request that you're super eager for. So, this journey is, and Jeff said it perfectly. The reason we want to highlight you here and allow you to share some of your learnings and your stories is, you haven't been a path follower. You've absolutely learned the foundations, but you've carved a new path and you found ways to connect value across the business, which ultimately is, where we found our most successful customers are doing is not thinking within a box, but thinking more broadly about the business. And from day one, you've always been there. You've always been thinking that way. So let's start with how you were originally, as a refresher, how you originally came across SmartSuite back when you were at VCU.
Right. So my previous position at VCU, I was in the College of Health Professions, and I was a coordinator for the clinical rotations and the online program for their medical lab sciences program. And I came across SmartSuite originally as I was looking for a way to more transparently share our students' requirements and needs with both the students themselves and our clinical partners while they were on rotations. So I was kind of looking for document management mixed with some project management, maybe, but really had no clue what I was looking for at the time. And it was honestly, any of you who have worked with SmartSuite will know that the way that they handle customer questions and ideas is unique in the business, I think. But I asked a question in the chat one day and somehow ended up on a call with Rick. I don't remember exactly how that happened. And it just kind of grew and built from there. And by the time I left, we had built a full clinical tracking platform that our students logged into as guest users, and our clinical sites could see kind of the overall status of the students and things like that. And I had been developing a way to track our online program students as well. So yeah, so that's kind of where we came from at VCU. I'll wait for more questions before I talk about AB Tech.
Sure. Well, let's roll to that. All right. So you sort of forged the path with SmartSuite at VCU, introducing it to several sections of the business and proving it out, probably just starting to realize the power of it. Because then I know you've always had a passion for the education space. You then had this opportunity to join AB Tech with some very open-minded folks that wanted to see how they could improve their workflows, how they can improve the way that they're managing their data. And so how did those early conversations go in introducing SmartSuite?
So just as kind of a setting the scene, sort of an idea, I have been with AB Tech for just about 13 months now, so not incredibly long. And I did warn our president, Dr. Gossett, when I started that I was going to be a troublemaker. I'm not sure he believed me. But when I arrived, it was my first time working in kind of a community college space, and my first time not being kind of in a siloed sort of a department that kind of kept to itself, because my position is actually housed in what is our division of continuing education, which for any of you who are not kind of in the community college space means we house the non-credit bearing programs. So they don't end in associates or bachelor's. They sometimes end in like a nationally recognized certificate. So we have things like CDL, we have barbering, we have a variety of career preparedness. We have advanced manufacturing, small business center, bio network. We have a huge range of things. And we are a department that we have to move very agilely because we are constantly responding to the economic and workforce conditions of our region. So I was hired as actually part of a campus-wide grant funding effort to do some improvements in data and infrastructure, and some financial responsibility pieces thrown in there. So my title is analyst, and I'm kind of glad that they didn't put just data analyst, because I've done, since I've been here, a lot more process analysis than data. And so kind of what I walked into when I was first getting used to the organization, you know, they thought of themselves as a college. We thought of ourselves as a college, but we didn't necessarily think in terms of systems within the college. We kind of had data and process islands, if you will. So we'd have people over here doing their own thing and people over here doing their own thing. And so completing some of our business processes kind of felt like if you're trying to cross a river, you're jumping from slippery rock to slippery rock instead of having one cohesive bridge. And that kind of exacerbated what I saw as the natural siloing that happens between our non-credit bearing and Con Ed and our credit bearing over in the curriculum side, which would be more of the traditional associate's degrees and such. Operationally, they were already very separated. And then we also had that issue of everything separating further. So we do have a central ERP. We use Colleague by Ellucian, but for any of you who uses that or has heard of it, it is what's called a unit database, not a relational database, which makes it really, really hard to do things like structural analysis of the data, looking for relationships, and you end up with really bloated structures and duplication. The result was faculty and staff were existing in survival mode, housing their own manual processes to get things done because there was no kind of way to centrally oversee it. And, you know, a lot of people had gotten to the point with Colleague where they said, it doesn't serve my needs, I'm going to do it my own way, which oftentimes meant, you know, an Excel spreadsheet that someone maintained on their own. And the Excel is great for many things. It is not great for collaboration or transparency. And so what we ended up with was that pretty much everyone I talked to was in a state of treading water. They were accomplishing the task. Their head was above water, but it was just barely. And I kind of had a gut feeling very early on that, okay, something's going to happen that's going to disrupt this. And then just over a year ago, we had Hurricane Helene hit our community here in Asheville. It wiped out regional infrastructure. We didn't have water for, I think, 2 months after the fact, clean drinking water. We didn't have power for nearly a month in some places. Cell service was down everywhere for several weeks. And so that kind of left community institutions like AB Tech really scrambling to try to figure out, how do we assist? How do we take part in this? Now, at the time, bear in mind, I'd been at AB Tech for about a month. So I was mostly observing from the sidelines because my official responsibilities weren't really in full swing yet. And I was watching as the major stress this hurricane caused on the systems that in my mind weren't really systems, were just kind of causing all the islands to crumble. So, for example, if critical information was stored in a spreadsheet that only 1 or 2 people had access to, and we can't get a hold of those 1 or 2 people, we're dead in the water. So just to highlight kind of how we really dialed in on SmartSuite in Con Ed initially, was one of the really heroic efforts I watched AB Tech perform after Helene was dedicating themselves to contacting every single student that we had for welfare checks and needs assessments. Now in Con Ed, this is a challenge because 1, we don't start and stop on a term schedule. We have classes constantly going. And number 2, when our students register, they don't always provide us great contact information because they may be taking a single, notary public class on a weekend and they don't think they're ever going to see us again. So we collected information however we could. I watched the coordinators trying to reach out to their instructors who reached out to other students and fill the gaps. We built spreadsheets, and then they called everyone for weeks. And the hard part that we have to kind of live with is we know we didn't get all the students. There was no way to because of the holes that existed. So at that point, I think was when I first really sat down with my boss and said, look, we really should think about a centralized governed system for monitoring some of this. And that's when I first brought up SmartSuite as an idea.
Kaitlin, it's what an extreme start to a new opportunity. And highlighting, what we're hearing commonly, if you don't have a system or sort of an orchestration set of technology that can bring different teams, groups, and sets of data together, then that whole concept of creating silos, just like you said, it gets exacerbated and then put to the test of something as intense as you all went through in that community. Wow, what a start. So how do you then go through that experience, pause and think, okay, I want to be part of the solution for, God forbid, something ever happens to this nature again, or just even in a minor capacity, realizing perhaps the inefficiencies that were shown during that experience?
I mean, coming from a background in healthcare, I think there's some extent where it's just almost an instinct at this point. See problem, fix problem. That's what you think about. And beyond that, I think it was one of those things that was very interesting to me when I was hired. My job description consists of about 6 bullet points because my boss had the foresight to leave some flexibility for us to adapt the position to be what we needed. And so for me, that actually was one of the really exciting things about this opportunity, is that I was allowed to really explore the needs and try to find the spaces where we could improve. As far as why I went back to SmartSuite, a lot of it had to do with my experience at AB Tech. And I really saw it as kind of the platform for us based on a whole bunch of reasons, which I can talk about now, or we can wait for a further question. But I had a whole lot of reasons beyond personal experience for why SmartSuite was the one that we chose.
Yeah. So how did it start? And what I mean there is, we see all the time that folks come across SmartSuite and they may be using it in their own vacuum or off the radar, shadow IT, if you will, especially at universities. We work with dozens, probably pushing hundreds of universities globally, various schools at various levels. And it's common for us to see just a few users in a box testing it out, playing with it, learning. And many of those admittedly never take the step to go and surface it as a potential solution more broadly in the education space. What was it that drove you to speak up and and have that conversation? And how did you start?
Well, I started by telling my boss I thought I could solve the problem and getting her blessing to do something because we needed a fix and we needed it right now. And so I the next day crafted an email to our then CIO and said, I'm sorry, but I'm asking your forgiveness and not your permission, but I do think IT needs to know I'm doing this. So that was kind of my introduction to him, and I'm very fortunate in that he is a very innovative thinker, and so he kind of caught on to the potential right off the bat. Aside from that, one of the really brilliant things that I think my boss did when she hired me was making my first assignment to go and talk to at least a representation of the stakeholders in every department in our division. And that was what I was in the midst of when the hurricane hit. But it really put me in that position at ground level and forced me to collect various points of view on priorities and struggles, and gave me kind of a really good feeling for overall where we were and where we were struggling. When I figured out kind of that we were going to need to do some process improvement, I started adding to those interviews some questions about process improvement, like where do you find you're using the most time that you feel like you shouldn't, or what would you do if you had more time in your day, and that sort of thing. And by the fifth or sixth meeting where I involved those questions, I started hearing a pattern of responses. Things like, we do it this way in our unit here, and we don't plan to change. This way works. It's too unique for a system. So basically the theme being everyone felt like they had needs that were so unique that no centralized tool was ever going to fit. And a few of them had actually even tried tools that had failed, and it left some scars. And in my mind, SmartSuite was a really good choice because I could respect those differences, but still bring us together into the same space. And honestly, that's been what I've considered one of SmartSuite's biggest strengths since I've been using it, which is just the ability for basically total customization to the process. And even from that to the individual user and how they see the process, while still maintaining the ability for us to have some centralized governance and data integrity and oversight that way. So at AB Tech, to me, it seemed like if I could provide one solution to meet multiple needs, that was going to be great for several reasons. Any of you who are in higher ed or work with higher ed know that budget is a very big deal, especially when you are a smallish community college. So not only did I pitch SmartSuite as kind of a cultural fit for us, but also as more of a savvy financial investment, because I thought we could replace several systems, and we have. And we have several more that we're examining right now to try to see if we can replace. Yeah, that's kind of how we got here.
Heard a lot there. So first off, the approach and getting that go ahead from your your manager at the time is so essential, and we see it often neglected, which is you called it out. I see a problem. I believe I can fix it. Do I have your blessing? In other words, do you want me to fix this?
Because they don't always want to fix.
For sure. And there's nothing more frustrating than seeing that, wanting to take the initiative to go fix it, and then being met with a lukewarm response or a lack of desire. Nobody likes to spin their wheels. And then it creates ultimately a culture of people just following, what's already been happening, and you lose that innovation, right? What is the quote? There's something about you talked about getting perspective as well, which sounds like your next successful path, gaining broader perspective in the business. I forget what the quote is, but it's something like if you don't understand your environment, then a spark to light a fire is just a spark in the wind, or something to that effect. But yes, okay. So you had your conversations, you did your roadshow without trying to solve for problems right away, just trying to understand what had been done successfully, what has been tried, where are people at. I also love that you knocked down the thought that while ultimately, yes, people do have their unique challenges, it is not so unique that these are all workflows, right? Front to back. So understanding, leveraging a platform like SmartSuite to understand how those workflows go and how you can make things more efficient, it becomes a bit methodical. You go to a new team, where does the work start? Where does it end? What data do they use? And you've become really good at that. So yeah, let's talk about, if you could go a little deeper on some of the reasons specifically the feedback you got from your your leadership team as to why they ultimately gave you the thumbs up with SmartSuite.
So there's a couple things. I already mentioned budget, writing my initial proposal. We did kind of a proposal both for like a minimal implementation just to kind of address that initial emergent pain point. And then we also did okay, but if we did a full implementation in continuing education, what would that look like? And so to do that, you have to understand the full ecosystem you're working in, and you need to know who would need what level of access so you can figure out paid versus free seats, and that sort of thing. And we kind of budgeted that out. My boss, I believe, took it to our executive leadership. I had conversations with our CIO, who is now our VP of Ops, and IT and various stakeholders, and just kind of got overall enthusiasm going. I started trying to show them some of the smaller wins. So, we started, and anytime we've been implementing here, and this pattern has worked really well for us, is we kind of use like a pilot approach. So we start with like a really narrow, simplified project. My boss likes to call it the low-hanging fruit. But it's just one process or one data collection point at a time. And I'm going to probably catch some flack online for saying this, but initially we always try to mimic the old process closely enough. I see a lot right now in the no code and tech communities of people putting posts on LinkedIn and such about, don't automate a bad process. It just adds, you just take junk and you make it faster junk, basically. But there's kind of a flip side to that I've seen, especially in an area where you have people with very low levels of trust and high amounts of skepticism when someone comes in and tries to change things. And that is that when you have that low trust and high skepticism, you need to provide them with an end product initially that is familiar enough that that fear and resistance to the idea of change doesn't halt the whole project. And once you kind of get that and you show them, look, here's what you're doing in a better way, a lot of times what I'm seeing is people then self-identify how to improve that process now that they've seen it in action in the platform. And so I fully respect the idea of not automating junk, but also you got to remember it's not just about efficiency, it's about the people too. So we start with those simple projects. We aim for kind of a familiar, user-friendly deliverable. And then we kind of have done a building block approach from there. So when we have a process that builds into another one, as I'm building it, I'm already thinking about, okay, when they're ready, the next one's going to connect in this way. And so we work through, we expand, we demonstrate, we allow testing, and then we implement. It's actually one of my favorite stories to tell now. At the time, it scared the heck out of me, but part of how I realized skepticism was so high here is I was in a meeting with one of our team members and trying to explain how I could fix a specific process and give a recommendation that we try SmartSuite and launch it. And they looked at me and said, with all due respect, Kaitlin, I will believe you can do that when I see you do that. And it wasn't about me or about what I was trying to do. It was just the fact that they'd been here long enough to see things start and fail and start and fail. And they just didn't have faith that it would go through. And that's really that. And then the other hardest thing with implementing here has been a concept called process debt, which I think was coined initially in more the technology industry. But the idea that your processes, if they are poor, or if you're under-tooled or non-tooled in a process, that it eats away at your time and your other resources to the point that it creates a debt that's as heavy as a financial debt. And here at AB Tech, and honestly, as I've learned more about it all over the place in higher ed, we have so much process debt that people are just barely keeping the lights on. And that means that their bandwidth for being able to absorb an improvement is really low. They don't have the time or energy to try to learn a whole new platform. And so again, going back to building small and familiar means that you can free up just enough wiggle room for them to be able to be open to think of the next idea and make the next improvement and gain even more wiggle room. And then you start seeing those value added activities to the process, the things people couldn't do before, like think more about how they're advertising their courses. How do we reach this underserved group of students? You can't think about those things if you're barely able to get through your paperwork.
So well said. Yeah, it really is what it's about when it comes to process optimization is how do you either automate or expedite the you don't want to call it the mundane work, but essentially, yeah, the things that need to happen but take a good bit of time, laborious efforts. How are you able to capture that and give people back that headspace to be thinking more critically, creatively, forward thinking on the bigger picture problems they'd like to solve? So, I will say, yes, the technology helps. It also takes the person and the passion to go and do it. Had to be gratifying to hear that from your colleague there internally, which I'm sure they issued it as like a challenge to you, like a really healthy challenge, and for you to go rise to that and take it to where it's at now. Which I want to get to that. I want to get to some current state things, but let's talk about that first win. All right, so the first time when you had, I know for you the first win might be the eye opener or having folks on the team realize the power of SmartSuite. Is there a certain moment you remember that you might want to reflect on?
Yeah, actually. And it goes along with our very first pilot project too. So again, just a little bit of context. Here at AB Tech and Con Ed, we have what are called the Human Resources Development courses, or HRD courses. These are things like career skills, job preparation. We do a lot of work in the prisons on reentry and that sort of thing, but basically building people up steps in their career. Those are run by our coordinator, Marie Eller. She has been with AB Tech, I believe she said 20 years, so she's been here a long time. But she also had that kind of spark of willingness. And really what made this a great project was these HRD courses in North Carolina are what we call fee waived. That means the student doesn't pay for the course. We submit to be reimbursed for the cost from the state. That only happens if we have appropriate documentation on file for that student. And when we started this out, that documentation happened in the form of a printed out registration and waiver verification form that the students would walk into class and they'd fill that out. And that's how we knew that they'd been there. We didn't have pre-registration because we could not use our online system because part of the state paperwork requires a wet signature. And you can't do that in most registration platforms for higher ed. So what was happening is we'd schedule these classes. We had kind of an interest list that was maintained on a spreadsheet, and we'd hope that those students came, but we'd have no guarantees of who was coming until they showed up, filled out that paper. Then we had the data security issue of now you have these papers with sensitive information about these students being carried between point A and point B by the instructor. We had issues sometimes where papers would be lost and we couldn't register them, or handwriting would be so indecipherable that we couldn't register them, all sorts of issues. And aside from that, there was the time drain for our registration staff who had to hand key every single one of these student registrations. So we kind of looked at that, and because it was more or less in my mind just a basic form workflow, when I looked at it, I said, we can do that. And we can make that good. And so we launched that just with one class of the HRD classes back in the last spring. And then since then, Marie has expanded that to all of the HRD classes, which now have for the first time in AB Tech history, online pre-registration that we do through SmartSuite. Also allows our registration folks to process those registrations as they come in, rather than getting a giant stack of papers at the end of term that they now have to rush through. And for me, it wasn't just seeing kind of the process win there, though. There was a huge person win as well that really, to me, signified how this could go at AB Tech. And that was Marie, who will tell you she was not a technology person. I had to go out on medical leave in March. And when I came back, she proudly showed me her SmartSuite consultant certificate that she had earned through the academy. And that she had built her own solution for monitoring our staff association PD grant funds. And I thought, man, what a great demonstration of the empowerment that you can pass to people with SmartSuite. So yeah, so we've saved cost in paper, we've saved cost in human time and error. And from there, we also branched off and built a whole slew of other huge wins for us. That was kind of the domino that started the effect, though.
I love it. Let's audible here. I know I didn't have this on the agenda, but it's a topic that folks need to hear about, which is, and Brian highlighted it here in the chat. One thing I've always admired about you is your desire to understand more about the data that you're using to power these workflows. In other words, Brian had mentioned there. Do you have any tips to the audience here just about trying to understand, like, what questions you need to ask or how you go about making sure that data can be served within these workflows, like regulations and you've always asked a lot to make sure that you understand how and why data can or can't be used in certain ways. Any quick tips?
Well, and in higher ed, that's kind of a more complex topic because we've got layers, right? We've got regulations at the federal level, at the state level, and then for us in the North Carolina community colleges, we also have a system office that we are accountable to. Things like healthcare programs have their own external accreditation. So we've got kind of several buckets. We have the required by external regulation data.
Yeah.
We have the required for the internal processes in order to make them actually happen data. And we also have like the nice to have data or the building towards the future data. So we talk, a common topic of conversation in Con Ed right now is monitoring our outcomes for our students because we don't have a great way set up to do that yet. It's next goals that you'll hear about us coming out with. But we, as we're thinking about that, I'm going back to some of these processes that are kind of like the bread and butter, the things that we have to have that are the essential business functions and the data there, and think, well, if we're already collecting, ethnicity, could we also maybe collect their county of residence? Because then we could answer the question about like, where are students coming from? And could we set up an automation in the future? Could we get their permission to follow up with them when they leave the program and see if they met their goals and if they saw any significant increase in salary? Because we get asked that a lot at the community college level. So we kind of have to look at regulatory data, the things we have to have, then the things we need to have. And most of the time I found there's a great deal of overlap there, if not entirely overlapping. And then the nice to have. And honestly, what I often do is I will put it all, I use Canva a lot, but I'll open up I have a running whiteboard in Canva where I'll throw some tables in and I'll write what the data is and a description next to each one. And I'll stack them right next to each other. And I'll say, okay, overlap, 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 so that you can kind of get to that minimum required data. Because if you stick to the minimum when it comes to data integrity and data governance, it becomes a heck of a lot easier when you're talking about centralizing. So that's kind of how I go about collecting it.
Well said. Well said. All right, let's get back on course with the journey. I had to take us there because it's often where we see efforts to drive value fail is someone gets blocked at the gate. They have someone from a team that is governing this data, owning this data, and they don't want to pass it over. Where in reality, like you said, it's just understanding in what capacity and how can we, right? All right, so back to SmartSuite. You have some solutions running live. You're having success. It's early this year. You're wanting to go a little bit more full throttle. You have Marie turning into a champion as well, learning SmartSuite inside.
We have more who are in the academy right now as well. She was just kind of the first.
Amazing, amazing. So collaboration is a huge component of what, and we take a lot of pride in this with SmartSuite, of what makes it such a usable tool and to drive adoption. Can you share with us how SmartSuite has helped foster collaboration between different teams there?
I was hoping that this is one of the topics that would come up actually, because I've been thinking about it a great deal. And I think what it comes down to just is like the TLDR here, SmartSuite's biggest collaboration breakthrough hasn't necessarily been about, being able to tell each other what's the next step or setting a status or anything. It's been about more the idea of making things visible and transparent. So we're going from a state where people who used to work from their own spreadsheets as kind of static, isolated documents are now suddenly able to see how their data is fitting into the bigger picture, all in the same place at the same time. And that changes how conversations are happening in our departments. So, for example, and this ties back in, when we finished getting the HRD classes registration up and running, the next thing we did was set up a solution for our course coordinators to actually do their planning of the sections that were going to be delivered. And from section planning, that ties into the contracts we use for adjunct faculty and their payroll. And so that's an example. We started here, we added a piece, and now we're bridging into further. When I was talking to instructors before we implemented, one of them actually joked that payday was a happy surprise because they didn't have anywhere to log in and calculate their total pay. So if they had multiple paper contracts, because they were paper contracts, they would have to sit there and do some actual addition and subtraction and hope that they had all the change records if the schedule had been changed. And so a lot of them just didn't bother. They just let it be a surprise. So now, because we're planning the sections in SmartSuite, because we've automated schedule production for the sections, which dictates the hours that go into the contract that can then be aligned with a payroll schedule that's in SmartSuite and assigned to the pay period, we can calculate those payrolls live, even if we're changing the schedule. And each instructor has a guest login, and they can now go into their own dashboard, and they can see, this is what I'm expecting to be paid this upcoming pay period. Here's the payday, here's the contracts involved. And we're working with our payroll department because that's a very compliance heavy department to make sure all the I's and T's are dotted and crossed. But that's been a massive thing in transparency. It really kind of shows, I think, the faculty, the adjunct faculty, that we value their time, that we value them enough to be open and honest about what we're paying and what they can expect, and that we are a team with them. We're not just kind of shoving a paycheck to them and letting them go off and do their own thing. We want to show that we're supporting them too. So really, transparency that is created in SmartSuite with the collaboration we're doing, it's really starting to drive some cultural changes for us as well.
I have to double click on that. We strive here to be not just the technology that's used, but to help nurture a more collaborative, communicative culture. Anything specifically you want to share on that topic about how you see things trending and what has you excited?
Oh, talking about some culture there. Could you repeat that question just so I make sure I'm staying on track?
We had talked about how visibility and transparency is just you're seeing it impact the culture. You're seeing people want to take more initiative in things and feeling like they have the visibility to be, respected and clear in what they need to do. Dashboards is something I know that you've leveraged pretty handily in order to communicate that, especially up to the executive level. I don't know if there's anything you want to share, maybe some gems or some dashboards you've created.
I can't show dashboards in this particular webinar because a lot of it is high risk student data or business confidential. But what I will say is, focusing on transparency for us hasn't just been about helping teams collaborate. It's also been kind of about transforming our accountability from every level, from the students up to our executives. And I kind of had two examples that I jotted down in this kind of realm. First off, about 2 weeks ago now, we launched a solution for our EMS program's clinical rotation. So prior to SmartSuite, it was all on paper. The coordinator had to spend hours rolling up and counting skills and tallying for each student. So there was no real-time view of progress for students, which made it very hard for them to be accountable to what do I still need to do. So as of 2 weeks ago, they now have their own dashboard when they log in, and they are able to see, I need, 5 more pediatric calls before this rotation is over. I got a poor review from this instructor that I need to follow up on. And so that's created kind of two-way accountability for the program there. And then more at the executive level that you mentioned, as a grant-funded position, I've always kind of been keenly aware of the fact that at some point I may be called upon to justify my existence or what I'm doing. And so as soon as we got the approval to use SmartSuite, I started using SmartSuite for one of its original use cases, which is managing all of my projects, which is good because I think my count is over 20 right now for projects that are active or closing. And then we have a long queue of requests that we're working through as well. So part of my tracking of my projects in SmartSuite is that I keep track of my own kind of objectives and key results, so that if and when I am asked to report on what I've been doing or what our ROI is on SmartSuite, I can just go over there and say, okay, they're most interested in this topic. I'm going to pull this report. And so I have several different dashboards that are meant kind of for the mindset of different people in different roles, and then I can just pull those whenever I need them. And that's been super handy because you really do in higher ed never know when you're going to be asked to justify what you're doing.
Yeah, the live nature of having the right data feed into dashboards too is, I know that you and I have talked about that before. Quite handy when someone calls on you for something occasionally, the last thing you want to do is go scramble to create a report to try to provide the data or
Yeah.
prove it. Yeah.
Well, and just as a comparison, previously when we need to report on, say, a building was going to be closed for maintenance and we needed to report which classes and students would be impacted, what would happen is our VP would send out an email to all her directors, who would email all their coordinators, who would email their instructors, and then the data would come back up that chain and have to be collated. I actually saw cases where the impact happened before the report made it back. And that's not a great situation to be in. And that's a large part of what I'm trying to fix in my role.
Sure. You're a
Real
big fan of
quick.
automation. We've talked about this. I'm going to weave in we want to get into students and lessons learned and all that good. And we're actually tracking up on time here soonish. But automations has been something that you've always looked to increase efficiencies and to build believers, really. What's one SmartSuite automation that you would say saves your team the most time each week?
I think the automated schedule generator that I set up for our coordinators. So they right now just have to enter the date range for the section, the days of the week that it's meeting, and the start and end times of the meetings, a break if they have it. And they push a button for a nice button automation. And well, depending on how long the class is, it can take a little bit longer. But for the average class, in just a couple minutes, they have a full set of schedule records in their calendar table ready to go. And then they just go in, and if there's any exceptions like a holiday, they'll get rid of that. Or if they need to change the hours on one day because the instructor has an appointment or whatever, they fix it there too. So that saves a lot of time compared to paper calendars and colored pencils.
Nice. Okay, students. Very topical, because you do have to be thoughtful in how you engage students in these workflows, right? Isaac's asking here, and then I want to go deeper into this capacity. Isaac is asking, how did you manage to communicate the feedback to the students for real-time feedback, or would that be through the instructor?
So the students all have guest logins for SmartSuite. And so I set them up a dashboard that has, I'm using the progress metric mostly because they have specific counts they need to hit from their skills categories. And so I put in the goal for each skills category as whatever number they need. And that ties into the patient care reports that they're submitting through, and it pulls it out. So they can go in and see when they log in, it filters automatically by logged in user. So they're only seeing their stuff. And they log in and they can see, okay, I've got this many adult calls, I need 10 more. I've got this many pediatrics calls, I need 4 more. And they can communicate that back with their preceptor.
I love that. It goes back to the notion of when getting someone to use and adopt a technology, the less they need to learn, the more likely they are to adopt it. And so things like filtering out only what they need to see at that point in time, right person, right place. I love that. Let's go deeper into that student realm, because you are, starting to introduce some workflows that would incorporate students in various capacities. Is there a learning that you might want to share there about either feedback you've heard early on from students, or just how you went about considering students as part of these workflows?
It's a little bit early, to be honest, because it's
Sure.
only been about 2 weeks and they're not in rotations every day. So I probably wouldn't have good feedback on that for another month or so. I can tell you it's working because I check in my status as an admin to make sure there's no errors firing off or anything. Aside from that, when you're involving students, I think my biggest thought is just you need to be a lot more careful about having your policies and procedures in writing before you invite in students, both for their clarity and comfort and for backup for if and when someone tries to do something that they shouldn't. And I unfortunately speak from experience in that realm, but for me, for example, and this is the world we live in now, one of my favorite things to do for anyone who's like, oh, write a procedure. I don't want to either. But I did it in an hour for this by sitting there with voice memos open on my phone and talking through every single thing that I had set up, and then going into ChatGPT, pasting the transcript and saying, make a user guide. Here's the areas I need you to cover. And then I spent like 10 minutes editing and it was ready to go. So don't let writing down a procedure be the reason you don't have one.
So good. I was with a customer recently that said they created an entire library of SOPs in SmartSuite just using Smart Docs and our integrated ChatGPT just to get a version down, right? And then they went and
Yeah.
iterated. So yeah, moving quick and not overthinking those processes. Let's pause and talk big picture now. You've learned some lessons. You've carved a path here, sort of done it your own way, but I've appreciated that you're a student of the game. You join many of our webinars. You've learned from others' journey, from other folks' journeys that we've shared here. Um, what lessons, key
Mm.
lessons, have you learned that you might want to share some wisdom from?
Well, aside from if you're new to SmartSuite, get in the community and be involved because it is one of the best places to learn and connect. Kind of my biggest lessons coming through here, there's really kind of three big ones. Number one, be prepared to think in terms of what your return on investment is from the very beginning. And I say that not referring to just financial ROI, which is how most of us are used to hearing it, the dollars that I can save based on time and all that, but I'm talking about with deeper outcomes, like paying down that process debt and freeing up that staff bandwidth so that you build trust and you create space for new initiatives. And the other thing I would say about ROI is you don't wait till the end to measure it. Build that monitoring right in as you're going. That's the beauty. You're in a customizable platform. Figure out a way to use it to capture what you're doing. And then second, I would pair that with small visible wins. Pick some things to do first that are necessary, but not necessarily so mission critical that if for some reason it fails, it's going to bring your whole organization crashing down. Look for something that's a widely recognized enough pain point that people will recognize success. For us, it was that HRD registration. And then when you do succeed, as I hope you all will, and you prove yourself on the platform, you can then earn more presence with leadership and start to get those champions to join you. And then kind of the third thing I've learned, and it's been a big personal one for me, is you got to be prepared to shake things up. Implementing SmartSuite, you need to understand, isn't just a technical project. It's going to be cultural. You're going to need to challenge the status quo around you, be willing to ask hard questions, and be willing to speak to audiences who are at hugely different levels of readiness for change. In a lot of cases, you're going to be introducing the idea of kind of systems and process thinking itself because it's not widely taught outside of, say, management and maybe business degrees. And a lot of us in higher ed, that's not where we're coming from. So if you're going to succeed, you got to be prepared to be leading an organizational culture shift in how people view systems and data overall.
Just buckets of gold nuggets right there. I'm sure everybody's taking notes. And it comes down to a desire to want to make change, right? There's the technology that is as flexible as possible with SmartSuite. We have our templates that can get you most of the way there in many cases, but I still go back to that thing you said earlier, which is like, if you just accept, colleagues and peers saying, well, my workflow is different and it's not going to suit me because I need a specific thing, then you end up with a culture of 300, 500 point solutions that are all cobbled together and you never really get that cohesiveness. So yeah, I have to compliment you again for meeting people where they're at in terms of their level of receptiveness to tech adoption and in education. I've seen the full gamut. And it's quite common to find people that are just happy with the status quo. So again, kudos to your broader team here. I know some have joined us on this call for having that
A
open.
number of them are here.
Yeah, I love it. Shout out to AB Tech folks. All right. Coming to an end here and want to leave time for any questions that folks have. So please hit us with some questions in Q&A and here in the chat. If there is one sort of future plan thing, either workflow or piece of the journey that you're excited about, I know you have grand plans for continued builds here. You said 20 plus projects that are all hitting your queue, and some of those will be done in SmartSuite. Are there a few that you might want to share? Future state workflows?
I think the biggest one right now that I'm leaning into, because this is more going to impact the kind of strategic positioning of our institution as a whole. Anyone who's in higher ed will probably have heard, because it's big news right now, that as of June 1 of next year, non-credit bearing credentials and programs, so those not ending in a degree, are going to be eligible for students to receive funding through Pell grants and financial aid. This is going to change the way that we have to accredit our workforce and continuing education departments and divisions. And it's going to wildly change how we have to look at data there. Because while we don't know a lot about it yet, we do know that they have already outlined several requirements that are going to be a bigger data lift than what our colleagues in the degree-bearing pathways are dealing with. And as of right now, at least at our institution, our ERP just isn't built to capture the data that we're going to need to be able to prove eligibility of programs. So SmartSuite is doing two things. Number one, it's giving me a platform to actually do kind of a program audit, make sure our mappings are all correct in our ERP, and single out the ones that might meet eligibility criteria going into next year. And number two, to set up a means for us to actually collect the data to keep our approve and to keep our eligibility as we roll forward. So that is a massive kind of strategic project that we're working on right now. So, we're not just looking at today's inefficiencies anymore. We're now kind of looking at tomorrow's strategic opportunities, all in the same place.
Wow. It just goes back to, bigger problems, looking to solve for them. You can have a bigger impact, and you're just always aiming big. Well, you've got your small wins, and I know there'll be more along the way, but keep it going. This has been super inspirational. Well, we've just run up on time here, but if there's any questions we want to stream through here, if not, please do connect with Kaitlin on LinkedIn, and we can get you connected. I can guarantee we have folks in the education space that are looking for this spark, this fire to go start their journey. As it of course can seem daunting. You're a true star, and I'm excited to see you shine in the way that you are. I have to say that here. I'm impressed every time we catch up and you share, the new things that you're working on. So thank you so much for sharing the time with us today. And for everyone else and listening into Kaitlin's journey, I'm sure you're all feeling inspired when I get out there and start building in SmartSuite. Deborah, she is a treasure. There's no doubt. Jeff, anything else you wanted to share here, or should we wrap this up?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, thank you both. Kaitlin, I think Rick said it best, buckets of gold nuggets there. I think we're going to create a bunch of sound bites. Luckily, everyone's going to get a copy of the recording. I know that I'll watch it over again, but thank you for that. No Q&A questions that didn't get answered. One quick one is, Kaitlin, what's your favorite new SmartSuite feature? I know we roll out a lot. It's hard to keep track of them all, but is there one in particular that has just been a game changer for you that you can think of top of mind?
Most recently, probably the tabs and being able to kind of end the era of doom scrolling the more complex records.
Yes, nice. Yeah, tabs was like a quiet release that has really gotten a lot of attention, and attraction is making a huge difference, huge game changer. So
it's just one of those like quality of life things that you don't think of as being really impactful until you are talking to, three groups of stakeholders all accessing the same record. And now I can separate it out. So coordinators have their tab with everything they need to see, registration has theirs, and so on. It tidies things up and tightens it up and just adds that much more speed.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sharing my screen. Rick, can you see it okay? It's smartsuite.com.
Yes, we can see it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, last but not least, well, again, thank you to Rick, Kaitlin, and everyone that attended. I appreciate all the time. Because I'm part of the webinar team, just a quick little shout out. Kaitlin, you mentioned it as far as our resources. I couldn't agree with you more as far as best way to learn, not just in the beginning, but ongoing, is just tap into our community. If you go to smartsuite.com, you go to our resources tab, there's a lot of different resources here. The one in particular, the Academy, which Kaitlin, you mentioned some of the folks got certified. And then as far as webinars and workshops, if you click there, you can kind of see SmartSuite events. There's daily office hours, there's get started workshops, there's monthly training class sessions, and then we've got our upcoming webinars. So a week from now, we got one around BCP on October 8th. So just wanted to mention that as well. But last but not least, thank you again to everybody for joining. Special shout out to Kaitlin. Maybe we'll just have to do round 3 someday in the future. But thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful October, fall. I know we'll be in touch on things, but have a wonderful day. Talk to you soon.
Well, yeah, I'll make it a good one. Thanks
Everybody.
again, KP.